In this week's parsha, we have Hashem promising Aaron various different matnos kahuna, gifts of kahuna. And the pasuk says, "Vayidaber Hashem el Aaron." Hashem says to Aaron, "Va'ani hinei nasati lecha es mishmeres trumoisei," that I am giving you the guardings of my trumos, etc. Rashi, quoting these words, "Va'ani hinei nasati lecha," makes 2 points. Number one, he says besimcha, that this expression of hine over here is an expression of simcha. Rashi gives an example from another pasuk, and then Rashi goes on and says, "Mashal melech." It's a mashal of a king that had given a field to his friend. He had not written down a deed or a contract. He didn't sign it. He didn't bring it up to court. So eventually, someone comes and tries to protest or contest this particular gift that the field belongs to this person. So the king says, "Is anybody that going to want come and try to protest? I'm going to write for you a deed, I'm going to sign it, and I'll bring it up to court." In a similar way over here, since Korach came and protested against Aaron's kahuna, so the pasuk comes along and gives him 24 gifts of kahuna, bebris melach olam, with a covenant, as the pasuk says, a covenant of salt, as Rashi explains over there in that pasuk, that it means like salt that lasts and doesn't spoil, and therefore the parsha is put over here. Says the Rebbe, seemingly Rashi just told us 2 separate things that are seemingly not connected to each other. First of all, that it's besimcha, that the word hine over here means besimcha, and secondly, this mashal of the king, etc. Why is Rashi putting these 2 things together in one Rashi, in one continuation, especially when we look in the source of Rashi, which is the Sifri? These 2 things appear as 2 separate things completely. Some other things we need to understand when says the Rebbe, when we look at the Sifri, which is again the source of Rashi. Over there, the expression is Amar lehamokim, that Hashem says, "I'm going to give you these 24 gifts." And then it goes on to speak about so that no one could contest, etc., etc. Rashi, on the other hand, says Bo hakosov, the pasuk, the Torah, is giving these 24 gifts. Number 2, why is it relevant over here how many gifts there are? Rashi should have just said he gave him gifts of kuna. Why is it relevant that it was 24 gifts? Says the Rebbe, in regards to this diuk of why it says Bo HaKosov, the Rashi says the Torah is giving him these gifts. So we can explain this seemingly based on another difference between Rashi and the Sifri. In the Sifri it says, Lekach Nemra, this is why this parsha was said over here, close to the story of Korach. In Rashi it says, Lekach Nismecha Parsha Zulakan, which means to say this is why this parsha was placed over here. In other words, according to the Sifri, this is in fact when this parsha was said, when Hashem says this parsha. According to Rashi, it wasn't said over here, it was said elsewhere, either earlier on or later on. It's just that the Torah put it over here. And that's why he uses the expression Bo HaKosov, rather than saying that Hashem gave it, he's saying the Torah is putting it over here, the Torah is giving it over here. But says the Rebbe, this itself we need to understand, where is Rashi learning this from? This chidush that the parsha was not said right over here. Says the Rebbe, seemingly we could explain this based on another difference between the Sifri and Rashi. In other words, to understand whether this was said over here or not. That this is dependent on another difference. The Rebbe prefaces by saying, when we look at the pasuk says, Koil terumas hakadoshim, all of these gifts of these holy things, I have given to Aaron as an everlasting covenant, etc. When it says Koil terumas hakadoshim, that's, you would say, the pashtas that it refers to all of the gifts of kahuna. In fact, according to the Sifri, in these few psukim there are either explicit or hinted to all of the different matnos kahuna. And therefore the Sifri could say that it was said right over here. But Rashi doesn't bring these different hints of what some of these psukim may be alluding to. So some of the matnos kahuna are clearly not mentioned in these psukim. In fact, the place where the Torah tells us clearly about it is much later. It's in Parsha Shoftim, and according to a Rashi over there, it may be associated, actually, it is associated with the story that happens with Pinchas much, much later. That's why these matnos kahuna are given those extra few that are not mentioned here. So if that's the case, we must say that when was this parsha said? If it says Koil Terumas HaKadoshim, that all of the gifts which we're saying most probably refers to all the gifts of kahuna, but some of them were said much, much later, only after the story in Pinchas, which is basically 38 years later. And therefore Rashi is saying, yes, it was said at a different time, the Torah just placed it over here. The problem, however, with learning that it was said much later is that we're saying that this is a mashal of a king that wants to make sure that the gift that he's giving is not contested. According to this will come out that the Eibishter is only saying this parsha 38 years later. Is this when he's going to make sure that no one argues on this gift? So therefore the Rebbe now turns it around and says, it makes more sense to say the other way around. That according to Rashi, these gifts that are mentioned over here were really all said earlier already. It's only that the Torah placed it over here. But again, we need to understand if that's the case, what is forcing Rashi to say that it wasn't said right here, and it's only placed over here for the purpose of, as Rashi explains, for that no one should contest the kahuna, etc. Says the Rebbe, the explanation is, when we look at the matnois kahuna that are mentioned there, the gifts of kahuna that are mentioned in these psukim, there's absolutely nothing new as far as these matanois that were not mentioned in the Torah previously. These are all things that were mentioned already earlier. The only thing that's added over here is in the beginning where it says Lamoshka, that this is being given for Aaron as distinction to show his greatness, etc. And all the way at the end, this pasuk that describes it, and that it's being given as a bris, a covenant forever, a covenant similar to salt, etc. If that's the case, when the pasuk says the words Hine nosati, behold, I have given, so it doesn't mean that the Torah is giving it now, because clearly this was all given before already. So therefore, Rashi is understanding this to mean that it was given, it was said much earlier already. It's only that the Torah is placing it over here, but the actual things themselves were said already much earlier. But what's relevant, and the reason why it's put over here, what's relevant to take off this era, this protest, is both the fact that Hashem is making a bris, a covenant for it, which is actually being said over here, but also the actual giving of the gifts, although it was said already before, or done before already, the reason it's being put over here, because this is relevant, the actual giving of the gifts as well, for taking off any protest to Kohana, as we're going to explain soon. So in order to understand this, the Rebbe first goes back to explain the connection between the two parts of Rashi. As we said before, Rashi starts off by first saying that Hine is an expression of Simcha. Why does Rashi say this? Because usually the word hine, similar to hineni, it means I'm ready to do something, I'm prepared to do something. And when we're speaking about doing a particular act, it's usually going to be the kind of thing that there's some sort of chidush by the fact that it's happening over here. There's some sort of novelty in the fact that it's being done. So for example, the Rebbe brings a few examples, and just mention some of them. The Eibishter says, Va'ani hineni mevies hamabel, I'm going to bring a mabel. So why is it such a chiddush? Because originally it says in the Torah that the Eibishter saw everything he made in the world was toiv ma'od. The creation was great. Now the Eibishter wants to destroy it. Sorrow says, Hine no atzarani Hashem eledis. Hashem is holding me back from giving birth. Again, it's a certain chiddush that's happening here. It's not the nature. The woman should be giving birth. Especially Hashem promised Avram that he's going to have many descendants, and she's not giving birth, so she uses this word hine. But in our pasuk, seemingly, again, there's no chiddush. All of these gifts were mentioned already earlier. And therefore, Rashi says that the word hine over here is also an expression of being prepared and ready for something, but in a different way. Rashi says it's a lashon of simcha. And when you're joyous and happy about doing something, this itself gets you ready and prepared with a zerizus to get excited about doing this, prepared to do it. In what way is the simcha expressed over here? This is now the second part of Rashi. Rashi is explaining that these matnos kohuna, this is something so amazing that this has the power to nullify any sort of protest against kahuna. And that's why Rashi continues that not just gifts, but as a result of the joy, Hashem is giving 24 gifts. Because seemingly you could say, isn't it enough already? We had a miracle that Aaron's staff blossomed. And nevertheless, no, Hashem is doing more things, giving gifts, and 24 gifts, which clearly shows that Hashem is not only giving it, but it's all being done with tremendous simcha. The Rebbe now looks at the various different aspects of the gifts and the fact that there's a covenant for it and so on, and explains how each one of these things is so relevant and important. So the Rebbe looks at Rashi's mashal, and to try to understand why does Rashi even need a mashal and why all the details of the mashal. So in the mashal we have, says the Rebbe, 3 points. The Melech writes the deed, he signs it, and he brings it to court to have it fully confirmed and established. The Rebbe says in the Nimshal, this is going to correspond to the 3 things of giving the 24 matnos kohuna, the covenant that's made for it, and the third point that it's in a way of melach olam, like salt, that's preserved always. What's the idea of a shtar? How do these 3 things fit? What's the idea of writing a deed, writing a document? Is so that if the person who owns the field is even right now not by the field itself. That's usually, you don't need to prove your rights to the place if you're living there and you're there. So even if you're far away, you always have this document as a proof that it's yours. In the Nimshal, this would be that the Koyanim, no matter where they are, even if they're not by the Beis HaMikdash doing their avodah, they always have a proof that they are the Koyanim for Hashem. They're the ones getting these gifts. In fact, some of these gifts are not even connected to the Beis HaMikdash and to Yerushalayim. But the shtar itself, the document itself, is not enough. For two reasons. Number one, the person who wrote the shtar, if he doesn't sign it, he may change his mind. So therefore, we also need a signature. We need it signed and sealed. And number two, even if he signs it, there could be another problem. Somebody else could come and contest it and say that the whole thing doesn't apply or is not true, etc. And therefore, you bring it to court to establish and to confirm the validity of the shtar. In the Nimshal, these two things would be the idea. The bris, the covenant that Hashem makes, is similar to signing it, that Hashem is not going to change his mind, so to speak. And melach olam, that it's being done in an everlasting way, this is similar to bringing it to court. So Hashem makes the covenant with Aaron and his children for the kahuna, like that signature, that Hashem is not going to regret it, but still there could be a situation where maybe from external reasons it might be contested, or that will somehow nullify the whole idea of kahuna. The idea of kahuna is working in the Beis HaMikdash, and what about when the Beis HaMikdash is destroyed? So Hashem says the bris is in a way of melach olam, like salt, that's preserved forever, and in a similar way, the kahuna stays forever. Similar to bringing the shtar to court to establish and to confirm it that it's always going to be accepted. The Rebbe now turns to the neflois, to the wondrous things that are hinted in the Rashi. The Rebbe says to nullify the arguments of Korach, we say there are 24 gifts. What's the idea of 24 gifts? So the Rebbe says Korach in a certain way was acting like a ganev. We know there's a thief that goes in hiding and there's a gazlan, a robber that comes out in the open. Korach didn't come out with an open rebellion against Hashem, but rather he comes with all sorts of logical arguments, hiding behind this logic and saying, oh, all the people are holy, why are you special, etc., etc. We know that what's the punishment of a ganev, as opposed to a gazlan, he has to pay double. Now Korach didn't only sin himself and act like a ganev, but he gathers all the shvatim, they should all join him in this gneva, so to speak. So if we have 12 shvatim, and they all have to pay kofel, they all have to pay double, we end up with 24 matnes kuna. Are you going to say, but that's only 12 shvatim? What about Korach and Shevet Levi? They're the main troublemakers. Aren't there 13 shvatim? But the Rebbe says, in truth, once Korach is punished, and in fact, we say the Leviim actually joined the Kohanim and become one, there's no concern anymore that they're going to cause trouble, and therefore there's only the 12 shvatim, and therefore times 2 is the 24 gifts. The Rebbe says there's still another question we have. One of the gifts of Kohuna is called Terumas Meiser. After you give Meiser to the Levi has to take some of that and give it to the Kohen. So then, one of these Matnes Kohuna are not from the 12 Shvatim. They're again coming from the Leviim, and therefore you're back to 23 Matonis. But the Rebbe says really it's not a question, because the Pasuk itself emphasizes a few times saying that this Meiser, this Terumas Meiser, is Me'eis B'nei Yisrael, which means to say that really the obligation for this section to go to the Kohen is really on the produce as it was still within the Rishus of the Yid, of the Yisrael. The Levi is just the one practically giving it. Once he got it, he gives it to the Kohen. In fact, the halacha is that the Yisrael himself is allowed to give it if he wants to the Kohen. And therefore it comes out once again that all 24 are from the rest of the Shvatim from Yisrael. And the Rebbe concludes the Sikha by saying the Parshas Korach we always read either in Chodesh Tammuz or Shabbos Mevorchim Tammuz. It's the Chodesh of the Geula of the Frierdiker Rebbe. And just like in the case of Korach, as a result of his protest, not only didn't the Kuna get weaker, but on the contrary, he got stronger with the greatest strength, Bris Melach Olam, in a similar way, with all the trouble that they caused to the Frierdiker Rebbe through the arrest. And yet the Geula comes. Now it's coming out even in a much stronger way that all of his work of strengthening Torah, strengthening Yiddishkeit, is in a way of Bris Olam, stronger than it ever was before. Wellsprings of Torah reaching to the whole world as a hachana kroiva to the Gula Amitis V'Ashleim and the Mashiach Tzidkeinu B'Kariv Mamash.